Time for another board game review, and this time we have the game Exceed Fighting System, 7th Cross, Hunters vs. Demons. That's a mouthful. This was sent to me by Level 99 Games, and is designed by... Designed by D. Brad Talton Jr. Exceed brings the speed, tactics, and variety of high-stakes fighting action to life. Choose your fighter and enter the arena. There are no packs to open or rares to chase. Get everything you need to play right here. Bring your best to the battlefield with 4 new fighters from the world of 7th Cross. I don't know what 7th... I think 7th Cross is a different board game, I assume. But yeah, let me show you... It's upside down. Let me show you how to play. So this box comes with 4 characters. Zolt, Rania, Minato, and Turnaloose. And I'm going to show you, just for the sake of example, Rania and Turnaloose in this particular game. Here's sort of the fighting game field. It is 9 cards spread out, and your characters start on the 3rd and 7th space respectively. Each character comes with a deck of 30 cards, which contain normal set cards, 2 copies of 8 normal attacks. And there are also character cards, which contain 2 copies each of 5 special attacks and 2 ultra attacks. Each player starts with 30 life. There's no counters or anything for that. You just gotta keep track on paper or something. And then each player draws 5 cards from their deck. Whoever goes second gets to draw an extra card. Your maximum hand size is 7. If you ever have more than that, you discard to your maximum after you draw at the end of your turn. Now you take turns back and forth doing actions, and on your turn you can do one of the following actions. You can prepare, which means you can draw an extra card. You can change cards, which means you spend force to draw cards. You can exceed, which spends gauge to power up into exceed mode. Reshuffle means reshuffle your deck and discard pile to form a new deck. This can only be done once per game. You can move your character around, spend force to move around the board. You can boost. You can use a card for its boost effect. You can play a transformation. That lets you play a transformation from your hand by discarding another copy of it. And you can strike. If you choose to strike, both players put down a card secretly from their hands and resolve the cards based on the rules in the striking section. At the end of your turn, draw a card if you did not strike. Whenever a player's life reaches 0, he is eliminated and the other player wins. So throughout the course of the game, you may run out of cards in your deck. The first time you need to draw a card or wild swing and cannot, you reshuffle your discard pile to form a new deck. But if you've already reshuffled and run out of cards again, you immediately lose if you need to draw. Now let's talk about gauge. Gauge is represented by this sort of blue rectangle symbol. And basically it's this sort of resource you use to play powerful ultra attacks. You get gauge by attacking. You can use gauge to upgrade your character's ability through your exceed action or play ultra attacks. You can also spend them as force, which is a different resource, which helps preserve cards in your hand when using actions and boosts. So when you spend gauge, you move cards from your gauge area to your discard pile. You'll see what I mean in a second. You may choose to discard cards from your gauge regardless of the order they were placed there. Force is another resource and is represented by this sort of orangish, reddish sort of symbol. That allows you to play boosts. You can, when you need to spend force, you create force to spend immediately through any combinations of these methods. You can discard any number of normal or special attacks from your hand, or gauge your discard pile to generate 1 force per card. So if I discarded these 2 cards immediately, I could get 2 force. If you discard an ultra attack from your hand or gauge, you can get 2 force for that card. You can only generate as much force as you need to pay for an effect. You can't overpay for an effect and get more force. So let's get into the specifics of each action. So going back to prepare, when you take a prepare action, that's the simplest one, all you do is draw an extra card. Since you also draw a card after taking an action each turn, that turn you will actually get to draw 2 cards that turn, because you always draw an extra card at the end of your action. Changing cards lets you spend force to draw 1 card per force spent. So let's say I discard these 2 cards to get 2 force, then I can draw 2 cards. You have to spend all the force you wish to spend up front before drawing any of the cards. Your exceed action costs an amount of gauge, which is shown on your character card. So for Rania here, it would cost 5 gauge to exceed. When you pay that much gauge, you flip your character card and you go into your more powerful exceed mode. Exceed mode completely replaces your character's original ability. So her original ability is you may play continuous boosts face down. Before you set cards for a strike, reveal your face down boosts and resolve any now effects on them. But when you flip it, now when you exceed, put the top 3 cards of the opponent's discard pile with the boosts into your briefcase. Rania actually has a special card called the briefcase. And then your attacks, all of them have hit, put the bottom card of the opponent's discard pile with a boost into your briefcase. Once you change your character to Exceed mode, there's usually no way to change back to your standard ability. The Reshuffle action allows you to take your discard pile and reshuffle it to make a new deck. This speeds up the reshuffle you would normally get if you run out of cards. So if you want to get your old cards quicker, you can choose to reshuffle, but that's only once per game. If you want to move, you can pay force, 1 force per space to advance or retreat. If you're here and you want to advance past your opponent, that costs 2 force just to move past them. Sometimes movement effects are on the cards, like on this assault card, before you do anything, you close in too. So those movements are free. If you play a card with that kind of movement, you get to do it for free. But if you want to be able to move on your own, you have to discard cards. So if I want to, let's say, move 2 spaces closer to Turnaloose here, I have to discard 2 cards, and then I could move Renia closer. Or if I'm scared of Turnaloose, I could spend those 2 cards and move backwards all the way to the end or something. Now let's talk about the 4 different types of movement in Exceed. Close means you close in. You move towards your opponent as many spaces as possible up to the number of spaces indicated, but you cannot switch sides with the opponent. So if I close in 3, boop, 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 now I'm right up next to Turnaloose. If I just move, I can move either direction up to the number of spaces indicated, and if I have enough movement, I can go past my opponent if I choose. Advancing means moving towards your opponent as many spaces as possible and continuing straight forward. You can't go backward. And retreating means moving away from your opponent as many spaces as possible. In any case of movement, if you're unable to move as far as indicated, you move as far as possible and then you stop. So if it said retreat 8 spaces, let's say I was here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's as farthest as I can go, so I stop. You can also never be in the same space as your opponent, so if I were to go here, I would have to move past them because I can't be on the same space. Now let's talk about the boost action. Boosts are unique actions allowed by the cards in your hand, and they have 2 types of boosts. You got instant boosts, like this one. So on the bottom of the card here, it says you can choose and discard a boost in play, and this one costs 0 force. This one, with this symbol, is a continuous boost, and this would give you a +1 armor and +3 guard as long as it's in play, and this one also costs 0 force. Instant boosts get discarded immediately after you do their effect, whereas continuous boosts stay in play and give you the perk as long as they are in play. Transformations replace boosts on a card and give permanent effects when they are in play. And there are 2 ways to play a transform. If you hit with an attack that has a transformation, instead of putting it in your gauge like you usually do with cards you hit with, you can put it in your transformation area and gain the effect. So if I hit Turnaloose here with Paranormal Investigation, I could choose to transform and get this permanent effect, which is your attacks have, after, you may spend 2 force. If you do, choose one of your continuous boosts. Do not discard it from play after this strike. Another way to play a transformation card is if you have 2 copies of that card, you can put that transformation directly into play as an action by discarding the second copy. You may never have more than 1 transformation with the same name in your transformation area, and each transformation in your transformation area reduces your cost to Exceed by 2. So if I had this card in play, then Renia would only need 4 gauge to transform, or not transform, but Exceed. And now finally, let's get into how you get that gauge in the first place, the meat of the game, which is striking. When a player chooses to initiate a strike as his action, or as part of a boost, he is called the attacker, and his opponent is the defender. So before we get into that, let's look at what all these numbers mean. So this is an ultra attack, and so ultra attacks on the top left have a gauge cost. You need to spend 2 gauge to play this card. Normal attacks and special attacks do not have that. So if we look at this blue number here, that represents the range. That's how many spaces the attack can hit. So this one can attack 1, but this one can attack 1 or 2, so it's a farther distance attack. This red number is the power. That's how much damage the attack will do. And this yellow number is the speed, or how fast the attack will activate. If the card has a green number, that's called armor and guard, and this is how well you can resist enemy attacks when using this attack. And of course, on the cards, they have their own special effects. So for neutralizer here, this card ignores guard, and if you hit, if the opponent is in Exceed mode, they must discard 2 cards from their gauge. All right, so finally, let's get into attacking. So let's say Renia is right up next to Turnaloose here. The attacker, Renia, sets their attack card or cards face down, and there are 3 ways you can attack. You can do a regular attack. You can just put 1 card from your hand face down. If you have 2 of the same card, you can play an EX attack. You put them both face down, and that means you would get a +1 boost to all stats. power, speed, armor, and guard. And finally, there's the Wild Swing. If you just want to go totally random, you take the top card of your deck and you attack with it without looking at it. So let's say Renia is going to do an EX attack with the sweep cards. She puts the cards face down, and now the defender can choose to do a regular attack, an EX attack, or a Wild Swing. Let's say Turnaloose also does an EX attack. This time he's going to do an Assault, and so he puts his cards face down next to each other. As soon as both players have put down their cards, you reveal. Voila! So we see now that Renia is sweeping and Turnaloose is assaulting. If it's an EX attack, you discard your copies and add a +1 to all the stats. If you reveal an Ultra attack, you must pay the gauge. If you don't have enough gauge, it is invalid and you don't get to do the attack. If your attack is ever invalid, then you do a Wild Swing and just do a random card. So let's see how this fight boils down. So first, you look at speed. Renia's speed is 3 because of the X attack. It's 2 + 1. Turnaloose is at 5 speed +1, so he's actually going to go first. An attack has 4 steps. Before effects, so Turnaloose here, actually his before effect is closed too. But since they're right next to each other, it wouldn't do anything. But if Turnaloose were here instead, he would actually move in 2 spaces, up to 2 spaces, before doing anything. Then you do your hit effect, if there's any. And this one, it says you gain advantage, meaning Turnaloose's player would actually get to take the next turn, regardless of who initiated the strike. So actually, if Turnaloose had attacked Renia with this card, he would get to go again. Once you do your hit effect, then you calculate damage. So he's going to do 5 power. If we look at this, Renia has no armor. She only has guard. Armor is a different value. Armor is this purple value, but she has guard instead. So she takes the full 5 damage. If she had played a card with armor, she would deduct the damage based on the armor value. However, her guard value is higher than the attack value, and so she doesn't get stunned. If she did not have high enough guard, then once Turnaloose attacked her, she would be stunned and wouldn't be able to perform her attack. So, in this case, since her guard is 6 and his attack is 5, she takes the 5 damage, but now she gets to attack back. Now, if there were any after effects on Turnaloose's card, we would do those after calculating damage, but he doesn't have any, so he is done. So Renia takes a hit of 5, and now it's time for her to go after Turnaloose. So, looking at these cards, she doesn't have any before effects, she is in range, because it's 1 to 3, and then she does her hit. So, Turnaloose would have to discard a card at random based on her hit effect, and since she did an EX attack, that's 7 damage. Turnaloose has no armor, so that means he's going to take a hit of 7 damage straight to him. He would be stunned, but since he attacked first, that means nothing really happens. But if Renia attacked first with that, he would not be able to do his attack. Now, after all of that damage calculation, each player cleans up by doing these steps. You discard any continuous boosts in your in-play area. So if you had any bonus effects, they are all gone. And if you hit your opponent, you put that attack card in your gauge area. Since both opponents hit each other, they would get to put these in as gauge. And so with Turnaloose, and that means that if they wanted to, on a later turn, they could spend this gauge to do like an ultra attack or exceed. So that's how you build up your gauge, is by doing successful hits. If you miss your opponent, you put it in your discard pile instead. And once that's all set, you move on to the next turn. And that's how the combat works. It's all about power, measuring speed, who attacks first, do they have enough armor to withstand the damage, or enough guard to not get stunned. If they get stunned, they don't get to do their attack that turn. That's how that goes with all the calculating. And that's the game. You use force to do special abilities, build up boosts, and then you try to move into the right range and attack your opponent and hope to get successful hits. Now, since this is a card game, let's take a look at just an example of some of the types of cards you could see in this game. Here's a spike card. It's a 2 to 3 range, so you don't want to be right up next to them. It's 5 damage, 3 speed, and 4 guard. But this card lets you ignore armor and ignore guard in your attack. Here's a special attack, Paranormal Investigation, one of Renia's attacks. It is 1 range, 2 power, and 7 speed, so it's a fast attack. If you get a successful hit, you can return up to 2 normal attacks from your discard pile straight to your hand. This is a block card, obviously a defense card. It doesn't do any, it has no speed, no damage, but it's 2 armor and 3 guard. When you are hit, after hit effects, spend force for +2 armor per force spent. And after the strike, add this card to your gauge at the end of the strike. So this can give, even if you defend, you can get some gauge. Here's a grasp card with 1 range, 3 attack, and 7 speed. If you hit your opponent, you can move them 1 or 2 spaces. Here's an ultra attack, Anticipation. This is a 2 gauge cost attack, 1 to 3 range, so very flexible range, 3 power, and 3 speed. And this card, attacks at range 1 do not hit you. So if the character is right next to you, you don't get hit. And this card lets you, before doing the attack, advance 1. So if I'm here and I play Anticipation, I can move in 1, and if Turnaloose is right next to me, his hit is not going to work against me. And here's a sweep card. This is 1 to 3 range, 6 power, 2 speed, and 6 guard. So definitely one for defensive purposes if you want to not get stunned. But also it has the effect of just making the opponent discard a card at random. So all these cards have some effects that do stuff before or after attacks. They have special conditions, different ranges and powers. It's a lot of different types of cards in this game that make up the characters' decks. Alright, so first off, the art is really nice, actually. The character designs are fun and outlandish, and they look like something straight out of like Blaze Blue or something like that. I love the art on these cards. Really, really, really cool. They did a great job with the art. Here's something I'm not a huge fan of. Instruction booklets that are like giant road maps. A minor complaint, but this sucks. This is such a pain in the ass. Make it a tiny booklet, because if I have to learn the rules and I feel like I gotta open a road map to look at this, this is such a pain in the ass. Especially because this game is not like that simple. Like, there are several types of actions you can do, and while it's not like incredibly complicated, there's a lot going on. So you're just kind of like fiddling with this, going, oh, what's force again? What's gauge again? Whew. Make it a booklet. This is nitpicking, but I'm not a big fan of having the 9 cards be your board. I understand that's probably much cheaper to do that, but it just feels cheap. I mean, and also, you know, sometimes the cards stick to each other and they slide around. Like, I would much rather have a board. Also, if you use 9 cards, it's too long. Like, just give me like a nice little small board that you can put the cards on and slide them around very easily. That would be so much better. But let's go into the gameplay. I think there are interesting ideas here, but I feel like the terminology and some of the rules are a little too complicated for what this game boils down to. There is definitely a little bit of an issue trying to work through these rules the first time, because it's like, what's gauge again and what's force again? It's like, I don't think it's organized in a way that's easy to learn. I think you could have had a smoother rule book. With that said, you do feel like you are watching fighting game characters on a 2D plane. Mechanics-wise, it is successful because you feel like your characters are closing in, doing your ultra attack, getting the right range. It's a clever concept, that range mechanic, and I do like the idea of building up hits. Like, if you get a hit, I get gauge. Build up some hits, and then once I have like 3 gauge, I can do my ultra. Again, super thematic. It really does feel like a Street Fighter-esque game. Unfortunately, I find that sometimes a lot of the combat just boils down to lucky flip. Like, yes, you can do your boosts in anticipation for an attack, and yes, you can try to predict what your opponent's going to do, but oftentimes you just have no idea, and it's kind of a, well, I hope I have bigger numbers than you, or I hope you don't play a card that just fucks my head over, essentially. That punishment of getting stunned if your guard isn't hard enough is pretty punishing, because essentially you just don't get, if you're not fast enough and you get stunned, you don't get to do anything in retaliation. And since there's not that much you can do to plan, I feel like you just feel like, oh, okay, I guess my attack fails and I don't do anything because your red number was bigger than my green number and I didn't know what card you were gonna put. I'm sure if you like played this game so many times and just know every character, like exactly what cards they have, you can, you know, have some more strategy. But, you know, if you're casually playing this, it does often feel like, oh, okay, you got a bigger number than me. I don't like that mechanic that much. There was another game, the Munchkin collectible card game that I reviewed, where it's that same thing. You put a card face down, reveal, oh no, it's bigger than my number. Oops. I much prefer card games where you play a card, for the most part, face up, and you go, okay, that's what I gotta deal with. What can I do to counter that type of card? I don't like these lucky flip mechanics in card games, but that's just my personal taste. Because of that flipping mechanics and kind of comparing numbers, I'm not completely sold on this game as a whole. I feel like there's just a lot of, like I said, oh, alright, oh, 6/5, you got it. I didn't know, but okay. And a little too complicated, I think, for what is not that long of a game. It's funny, though, because even that alone is thematic for fighting games. Like, if you, like, play a game, like, 100 times or whatever and know all the characters' moves, that's just, like, really good fighting game players. But if you're a casual player, you don't memorize all the moves or whatever, so it's hard to predict stuff. So I guess the lucky flip thing is thematic because you don't know what your opponent's going to do in a fighting game, but as a card game, it just doesn't work for me. If you like that sort of fighting game predicting, like, I want to master this sort of thing, then this is a game for you. For me, because I'm not a big fan of that lucky flip mechanic, I don't have the motivation to get super invested and memorize everything. So it's a game for, if you know you're gonna like this game, you will like it. But for me, if you wanted a game where you have to predict each other's moves, I think simplified rules would have been a better way to capture that feeling without overwhelming. So, but that's just my opinion.